Welcome to episode 2 of the Beyond Betrayal community interview with Shelley Martinkus on the topic of shock and denial. Shelley is the founder of Redemptive Living for Women, an online ministry for betrayed wives that includes counseling and support groups. Last week, Shelley and I ended our discussion with some thoughts on what the effects of long-term denial are and how support groups can help women confront the painful reality of their situation and move past denial. And I think particularly with Christian women, and you talked about this in your quick forgiveness kitchen convo, there's a lot of pressure on us to feel a certain way or respond a certain way in the good Christian way. And I think that that's partly from a distorted view of what a good Christian way is. So I talked a little bit about that in the anger blog post, because Jesus got angry at unholy behavior.
Yes.
We can too. We don't want to live there, but we can join him in that. It's okay for a time. Our legitimate feelings, sometimes they may not even be really holy. Sometimes they may be off the mark. God is big enough for that. I would rather see a woman shaking her fist at God.
Yes.
Because most of us go through a spiritual crisis like you just described. I would rather see a woman shaking her fist at God than turning her back on him. God can deal with that. He can deal with her turning her back on him too.
Right.
But I know she's going to get out of it faster if she's actually engaging him and telling him how disappointed she is with him. Because then they're still dialoguing. There's still
right.
There's still room. The conversation's still going.
Yes. Well, and even you saying, I would rather a wife be angry with God, I'm like, that's a wife that's not living in denial. And that takes so much energy, and it is so hard to allow yourself to feel that anger, so yeah, that's a good point you made.
Yeah. And we're all from different cultures. Even, you and I grew up on the same side of the planet. I'm living with people now on different side of the planet. You're a younger woman than I am by 10 years at least. And I'm also working with women who are 10 years older than I am or more. And there's different cultures there, and there's different pressures. I was talking to a woman in her late 60s a couple of days ago who's just gotten divorced. And this is huge for her. I mean, her husband has a huge story of massive betrayal and acting out and faked recoveries, and would not engage, and got to a place where they were living but as complete separate entities in the same house. And he was clearly still acting out. And so finally she asked for a divorce, but for her, she feels like such a failure. There's no divorce in her family. In the culture she was raised in, that was unthinkable for a Christian woman to divorce her husband. It is not so difficult for our younger generations. They have other cultural pressures on them, including the cultural pressure to say, oh, it's normal, they're all doing it.
That's true.
At least in the older generation, it was known that what they were doing was not acceptable. That we all agreed on that. Now we don't all agree on that.
Right.
So different challenges in the different cultures. So I think often I'm seeing older women are having more time being stuck in denial for long periods of time, because they really feel they have no other option but to be stuck. And I have this funny quote from this one woman, I'm going to guess was probably an older woman, saying she's tried everything. She's, from boundaries to disengaging to, and now she says, now I just live in denial like the rest of my friends. And my heart just broke for her when I read that, because, and I always, when people say I've tried everything, I always know that's not the case. I've tried everything I'm comfortable with, is what that always means. And I've said it, and that's what I've meant. So
right.
It's no judgment. It's just
exactly
all what we always mean. But God has a bigger definition of everything. So it's so often those things we're not quite really willing to engage, that He's saying that's the something you haven't tried yet.
Yes. Oh, it's so hard. And kind of piggybacking off of what you're saying, I feel like another big thing that I see with women getting stuck in the denial or shock is kind of putting a Christian covering over it. Like, well, it's going to be fine. I'm just going to forgive him and we're going to move on and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
You know, to me, like that's a huge red flag. Like, whoa. It is not that easy. You know, I mean, like even just forgiveness is it is so hard because that's, oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Terrible wounding. I mean, it's such a process. I think forgiveness without God is impossible in this situation, in these types of situation, because the level
Agreed.
of trauma, the level of pain, the level of grief is too massive for a human being to tackle it. It takes God, and God's going to walk us through a process of it because God likes process.
Yeah.
He likes
Yeah.
because he's going to do something more. He's going to, he's always working on making us more Christ-like, and he's like,
Mhm.
we're going to do something really good here.
Yes.
But it's going to take some time. So let's not kid ourselves that I'll just flick the switch, the forgiveness switch, and there it'll be. It's
Well, and I tried that. It did not work. I totally tried that. So I'm living proof that it is. I really had to dive into the grief and engage my anger and work through that denial and shock in order to get to a place where I thought maybe I could take the leap of faith and trust God that he would do something miraculous for me to forgive Jason. But yeah, that's a
yeah.
whole nother talk too.
Yeah, that is another whole other talk, and Shelley does cover off a lot of that in one of the Kitchen Convo series, which I'll put some links up on my website because I love them. I have watched them all. I absolutely recommend them to everybody. I talk about Shelley's quick forgiveness process and how grieving and forgiveness really need to go together in Beyond Betrayal as well, and I quote Shelley extensively in that. So yeah, I think when we are stuck in denial, we are actually sabotaging the forgiveness process. One
Yes.
of the problems.
Good point.
And I
Good
think that's
point.
why you see denial mixed with anger and rage frequently. I would also warn women, if you are tempted to live in that state of I don't want to know. I just, don't tell me details. I don't want to know. It is going to affect your other relationships because you can't put up a wall to protect yourself, a wall of ignorance to protect yourself and to protect your heart. And I understand you want to protect your heart. This is so wounding.
Yeah.
But if you do that, it's going to keep other people out. It's going to keep your kids out. It's going to keep, other people that you love
Such a good
out.
point.
Yeah, it's going to keep God's joy out. All the
Mhm.
things that He would have for you, the goodness. It keeps the good out as well as the bad.
Mhm.
So that worries me when I see women stuck in denial. I thought we would talk a little bit about the types of denial that we're seeing as well.
Mhm.
Because I think, there's a lot of different forms that it can take. Do you want to start by talking about some of the ones that you see commonly, the types of denial? I think we've covered them off kind of briefly, but let's
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, off the cuff, I think there's if I'm following your question, one is kind of that Christian covering where, oh, I'm just gonna, you know what, I'm just gonna forgive and we're just gonna move on, praise God. Okay, here we go, So
Yeah.
I feel like that's one type of denial. I think for me, when I look back at my story, what I did really well was I decided it was my problem. I don't know how you would categorize this as a type, but okay, I'll make it my problem, and then I'll change who I am in order to fix this problem. And really, that was me living in denial.
Yeah.
In denial that my husband was sick and he needed help, and I did not have control over his choices.
Yeah.
So those are the two that I feel like I see pretty often as
Very
far
good.
as types of denial.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily have thought of that second one. The first one I tend to call that spiritualizing, but yeah, spiritualizing like that in that circumstance is a type of denial.
Mm-hmm.
I often see women as well denying their own negative emotions. So we talked about that, what are the good Christian emotions to have? Ooh, if I'm experiencing some anger or I'm just going to deny that that's actually the case, and that actually will stick us in those negative emotions, I think, longer. We'll get stuck in more poisonous thinking and behavior longer. I have a woman I work with who is constantly low level angry, and
Oh.
it's affecting a lot of her relationships, but
Mm-hmm.
she never had a big she didn't have a kind of a moment of being angry at her husband. Again, this is an older woman, and I think for her it would have been inappropriate. I mean, I think she was relieved when she found out what was wrong with her husband. I think we get a lot of that sometimes, and that can be normal. If there's been a lot of poisonous acting in that you've seen, and you just weren't aware of the acting out, when you have an answer, sure, one of the emotions can be relief.
Yes.
But you're going to have to move into processing what that means for you at some point. See, she kind of skipped that, and now she's in low-level anger, which has gone on for 3 years, and her kids are feeling the effect of that, and she's never cried about the problem. She really has difficulty with grief, and she knows that's an issue. So she's praying, and we're praying that God helps break her open to experience the feelings. So she's in kind of a denial of emotions. Like the wall is so strong, and she doesn't have a lot of control over that even anymore.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, yeah, and you're saying like kind of the low level emotions, and I think that's one of the big red flags that I see with women that I work with is if there are no tears. And I understand that some people cry easily like myself and others don't cry very easily. Okay, but I still like it's concerning if there is no emotional outflow in tears. I feel like that's definitely another clue that you might be stuck in some denial or shock. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add on to what Shelley was saying, I was a person who did not cry easily most of
Really?
my life, despite having been other traumas and so forth. But this broke me. I am now a person who cries incredibly easily, and not just out of my own woundedness anymore, but out of empathy and compassion that was really not as present before
Yeah.
this happened to me.
Oh, a
So
jewel that's come out of this process for you.
absolutely, absolutely. I treasure that. And
Yes.
I'm able to connect with my kids better. I'm able to experience the highs of life better as part of being
Yeah.
somebody who can experience the lows.
Mm-hmm.
And that is precious, and I would not trade that for anything.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So denial. There are women who literally, when told, deny that it's happening, even if he tells her. I have met women who've more they make a discovery and they make excuses. I don't know if you see that at all. That's not, it must be one of the kids. It's um, it must have happened by accident. He can't, they evidence before their eyes. They refuse to acknowledge, I've got a poisonous situation here. It needs to be confronted.
Yes. Well, and I feel like women can stay in that spot for years and years and years, and again, back to just thinking about myself, I thought this would never be my story. I thought Jason only had eyes for me. Maybe it would be someone else's story, but it would never be my story. And really that's living in denial, like as I was sorting through it and just like, I can't believe it. This is my story. I never thought it would be the case.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of women feel that way. They just think, oh, no, it's the kids or even this isn't that big of a deal. I mean, I think we all, at least I did. I should just stick with myself. I really tried to convince myself that this wasn't, that it was okay. Can you believe that? But that is the denial. That is the shock. And, it's hard. Did you struggle with that at all? Did you ever try to convince yourself it was okay?
No, not so much, because I had grown up with a father who was a sex addict, and I saw what it did to my parents' marriage, and I saw my mother trying to live with it and live in denial and being more classically kind of codependent. And I always said, that will not be me. And I actually, this is my second marriage. My first marriage was also to a sex addict with a bigger story. And I said to both of them, unfaithfulness, even in porn use, is a showstopper for me. That is I told them before we were even engaged, if this is your issue, go away now.
Right.
I won't accept this.
Yes.
So I was in shock. So I mean, I went through shock, particularly the second time. The first time I never got full disclosure and stuff. I got evidence dribbled in here and there. And although, see, now as a younger woman, that with my first marriage, I again part of it was how it happened. And another woman told me her story that this same thing happened to her, where she was diagnosed with an STD, and the doctor didn't tell her, by the way, this is an STD.
Oh,
And that happened to me as a young woman in my first marriage. And I got told by a nurse at church when I said, can you pray for me? The doctors are concerned about this HPV thing that I've got. And, and a nurse came up to me and said afterwards, Lisa, that's a sexually transmitted disease. And I just looked at her and laughed. I said, that's impossible.
wow. Yeah.
I just said that is impossible, because I knew from my behavior and standards that couldn't have
Wasn't
been something
happening.
I contracted. And
Yep.
I was so certain it would not be something that my husband would ever,
Mm.
and I thought I knew both of our backgrounds and histories enough to know, no, that's not.
Not ever going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I got confused because it turned out that the symptoms come and go in HPV, and people, again, I wasn't told by the doctor. So when I went in to get it treated, and he said, oh, the symptoms are gone. It wasn't until many years later, another doctor said, when the symptoms were up again, and the doctor said, you've got this. And I said, but then it goes away. And she said, that's just normal. That's the symptoms come and go. And I
Right.
was like, why did nobody tell me this?
Yes.
Why aren't we informed that?
Right.
So there are always complicating factors to the denial.
Mhm.
And that's, I find, one of the trickiest things to work through with women. There's a lot of sex offending that goes on here. And so I do support women whose husbands are sex offenders as well. And sex
Wow.
offenders are also huge. They can make very elaborate lies and infrastructures of lying that make it very difficult to know clearly what's going on.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the evidence can seem so obvious to other people, but especially when a woman's living with an offender, he will gradually habituate her to abnormal behaviors, and make them seem normal.
Right.
So, for
Right.
example, he may be a nudist, and so that's part of his philosophy and the standards, and the kids should be nude too. And do you know what I mean? So it's all
Yes.
gradual and
Yes.
very subtle, and then it really messes with her sense of reality, her sense of her intuition.
Yep.
So I think a lot of counselors write off the wives of sex offenders in particular and say, she knew she was in some kind of stupid form of denial, but really she knew. I don't think that really captures the situation. It's a lot. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Oh, agreed. I mean, the addict even believes his own lies. I
Yeah,
feel like it, you know what I mean? I mean, that's
totally.
how deep they are. So, of course, we as wives are like, oh, I mean, I think we want to look at our husbands in the best light possible. So I mean, I think it's just natural as women to think like, no, to brush it off. But then when these master manipulators, liars, and again, they believe their own lies, I feel like
Totally.
in the pit of their addiction. So yeah, it's so hard to know.
It is. So always think we have to be careful about judging other women
Yes,
too. This is not an easy journey, even when it's straightforward, and it's almost never straightforward.
that's right.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, as
So
another
true.
Catherine, one of the coaches at Journey to Healing and Joy, said, "You're never just dealing with a sex addiction; you're also dealing with an addiction to lies and deception."
Yeah.
Yeah, my mother, who's an addictions counselor, said the lying's the last to go, and for some, it will never go because
Hmm.
they've become delusional. They
Yeah.
believe their
I
lies to the
believe their
point.
own lie.
That's right, and to the point where they can't actually escape that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's just one of the scary effects of sin.
It is for sure. I think, and I just want to mention or comment on when you said, it's so important for us not to be judgmental, which, that's so hard as fallen Christians. It is so hard to not be judgmental. And at the same time, as we talked a little bit ago about some of the jewels or some of the sweet things that have come out of this process, I do think that going through this, and especially like, again, 12 plus years ago, I was like, oh, that would never be my story. That would never happen to me. And today I can sit here with a lot of what people say, and I can say, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
And on one level or another, me too.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And so I think that's important. It's an important piece of this process.
Absolutely. And I think early on in the history of recovery and of women's healing, there was a lot of kind of BS, if I can be so frank, about what the journey looks like, and it was kind of idealized. This would be the ideal. And the reality is we all bugger this. British get a little upset. They don't like that word, but we don't mind it as much. Frequently we bumble our way through the healing process. Thank God he's got big arms.
Yes.
And he's okay with that. Sometimes I think he's okay with that, but other Christians, that's not the story that they want to hear, is that we're all fumbling our way to health and wholeness in him. And I like being able to tell women the stupid parts of my story, the things I smashed and the stupid surgery I had and stupid things like that. And I say them because I'm judging myself, not because I'm judging somebody else who's done them. Because they're part of the journey for so much of us, and so many people struggle with the temptation to mask the pain, with the temptation to live in denial, with the temptation, like we are at the end of the day, we are all just trying to deal with a horrific amount of pain that is complete overload for us.
Oh, yes. Yes. It is. This is the most ugly, the most messy process ever,
Yeah.
and so to expect it to be anything other, I think is going to be difficult. But I feel like for women to just embrace that this is really messy, is can be a really good thing. Yeah,
absolutely.
So that we can give ourselves grace and give everyone around us grace.
Absolutely, that's right. It starts with ourselves, and just being authentic. That some days we're just going to be losers on this journey. Just
and it's okay.
And that's right. And it's okay. God's
Mm-hmm.
okay with that, and we can be okay with that. We can give ourselves the grace, give each other grace, just like you said. That's gorgeous. You are so gorgeous.
Yeah.
So I just love, I love the way you're embracing women.
Thank
Not
you.
just in Colorado, but around the world.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I guess just to close off, this has been a very organic conversation, so I think we've covered everything I wanted to cover.
Okay.
I've just, wanting to know, I mean, is there anything else you can tell us about redemptive living and how people can get a hold of you? And do you have, like, when's your next session of starting your next set of groups? And how would women get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. It's RL4Women, FOR, women.com. And so that's I have a blog there, and I do some book reviews. I'll be doing a review on your new book in 2016.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, and that's where you can find out about the groups. And as you had mentioned, I wrote this workbook, Rescued, just this past year, and it's what we use in the groups. I do have a couple of new groups starting in January. So and like you mentioned, there's someone from Australia. They're over a conference line, so they're on the phone. They're not video. And so yeah, I think the website is probably the best way to check into Redemptive Living for Women. And then I would love to hear from anyone. So my email address is on the website.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your time today, Shelley. You're doing so much for hurting women. I love your work. So thank you as well to all of you who tuned in to watch this video. And we'll see you next time I get to talking with friends on this journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. This was great. So fun.
Good. Bye-bye.